We just passed day 500 of the Israeli-Hamas war. Hello, welcome to GRN. It seems like there's a whole lot of protests going on in Israel right now, and it's kind of hard to figure out what these people are protesting. We've had this war going on for over 500 days now.
Yep. And I know that Uncle Rob has talked a lot about it just because I record a show, you know. He's talked a lot about everything going on in Israel and how currently about 60% of Israelis want Netanyahu to just step down and either before, like right now, or after the war ends. They want him to step down. And a lot of people want him to admit fault for the October 7th incident, too.
Yeah, I've seen that. I've seen some videos here and there where people have gone out to the crowd to find out what they're protesting against. Why are they so mad and why are they protesting? And it's interesting that they don't have a singular view. Everybody's kind of protesting their own thing. And it even seems to me sometimes that they're protesting opposite sides of an issue. But they're out there protesting Netanyahu, saying that he's not successfully meeting either side.
Yeah, and I think I'd agree with that, to be honest. I see a lot of... So, Uncle Rob is a huge fan of Netanyahu.
Yeah.
Really likes listening to him talk, thinks he's a very eloquently spoken guy, thinks that he's just doing a good thing. And I'm not going to say he's not, but I hear a lot of... We're going to vanquish Hamas. We're going to clear out the Middle East. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. Total eradication was something he brought up once. But then I look at what he's doing, and he kind of fiddled around with the peace treaty, kind of fiddled around with a ceasefire. He keeps joining ceasefire talks. He keeps trying to give Hamas more chances. There was the whole, if all the hostages aren't released by a certain Saturday... everything was going to go horrible, and they were really going to punish Hamas for it. But I don't think I've really seen anything come of that.
Yeah, I watched one protester. He was with the military, and he said that they're protesting because when they went in there to get the hostages back, they were constantly told to stop, don't do this, don't do that, don't... We know they're there, but you can't go any further, you know. And this kind of reminds me a little bit of what happened in Vietnam. And we even see this now with Netanyahu, an information operation, where people are now getting into the government and stopping the government from doing war. Now, in America, when we were over in Vietnam, we were invited by Vietnam, South Vietnamese, to fight the North Vietnamese because of communism was taking over. So we were invited to be there. The problem is that we didn't take care of business. It became a game for politicians. And I think that's what the one guy was wanting to say about Netanyahu, is that this is a political game more than it is we want to win this war.
And I mean, as much as I think Netanyahu is trying to do the best, I see the same thing that we complained about with Biden. You know, he's wishy-washy. He never stood firm on anything. And the few things he stood firm on, it was like, why? Yeah. Why is that the hill you're going to die on?
Well, I think that they made a huge mistake by Trump telling them if something doesn't happen on this Saturday, we're going in, and that never happened. And I think that in this area of the world, in the Middle East, that shows weakness. And I think that empowers them to be even more resistful and to fight against that and say, well, yeah, but you didn't do it.
Yep.
Even if you would have, they would have been just as happy either way. But now they can use that against you and call you weak. And then I saw another woman, and she's protesting. She just wants peace. Mm-hmm. And for some reason, she's got in her mind that Israelis and she calls Palestinians can live side by side in peace. Well, the problem is the Hamas people do not want peace. You're not going to make peace with these people at all. And she's delusioned into thinking if we just had peace, all the hostages would be released. The other guy is saying, we've got to go in there and forcibly take them back. And you've got these two opposing sides now coming together and protesting to get Netanyahu, getting him out of office.
Yeah, you'd think that with the huge spectacle that was the returning of the bodies of the Beavis family, that people would be more ready to attack. Like, I wasn't alive, but I think about Pearl Harbor, you know?
Yeah.
The U.S. wanted to get into the war, and they said, what's the best way to get the U.S. into the war? We need a crisis. We need something sad to happen. Same thing happened with 9/11. Every time we get into a war, it's because something sorrowful happens, and then a whole bunch of people die. And you would have thought that the Beavis family, 2 children, a baby and a toddler, and then a woman, are promised to be brought back alive.
Yeah.
Israel was told that they were alive and that they'd be given back alive. And then they gave back dead bodies. And then you found out that the dead body of the woman wasn't even the woman.
Right.
And that the children were killed brutally. They weren't just like shot once or anything. This was like strangulation, beating to death. Horrific stuff that even an adult you wouldn't want to go through.
Didn't they even send them back in locked coffins without the right keys, and they had to cut them open and all sorts?
Yep.
I really think that all the hostages are dead. And I think that somebody needs to make the decision and just go in there and finish it.
Yeah.
It's got to be done. But I don't know if Netanyahu's up to doing that. I don't know what's stopping this from happening. Because out of one side of his mouth, he says, we're going to go get them. And you've got the full backing of the United States to do this. And Trump would have been there behind you, carrying this through, you know. So what are we doing? You know, what is their plans? Have you heard anything?
I haven't. I know that recently he launched another attack, but it wasn't like a large scale anything. It feels like they took Syria and they got Assad gone, and then they just kind of went, okay, job done, time to go home.
Well, you know, Israel's been fighting a war actually on several fronts. I mean, yeah, we've got the Gaza Strip with Hamas, and we have just north of them in Syria and in Lebanon, and all these places are actually, they're fighting a war everywhere.
Yep.
And I'm sure they're getting tired, but still, I think that all Netanyahu would have to do is say, Trump, we need you. And there would be Americans on the ground going through that place and rooting it all out and finding all the hostages.
Well, with the blow up with Zelensky, there was an article that came out just like 3 days after. You know, it was talking about how Trump had gone in and he had gotten mad at Zelensky. Zelensky had tried to throw a tantrum like a toddler. And Trump said, okay, fine. And then just pulled back completely. But just in the next breath, he turned to Netanyahu and he said, you have full authority to do whatever you want. We'll support you. He gave him full, total support. He's been making threats on behalf of Israel to Hamas. And Israel's just not doing anything with it. That's like saying, I need to go buy a pair of shoes and they're $100 and I have $5,000, but I'm not going to go buy the pair of shoes.
Yeah. It's a weird time we live in, because we also have another factor at play in this, and it's called anti-Semitism. Now, you know, it's kind of an interesting thing out there. Anti-Semitism is really on the rise, and it's kind of hard to figure out what it is that's causing this attitude. Some people say, well, you know, the Jews rule the world, and therefore, you know, they're going to take it over, and everybody's going to be Jewish, and all these powerful people are in place. And then you listen to another guy like Kanye West, and he says, the Jews run Hollywood, you know, and there's all this debate about what's going on out there. Now, there are a lot of bad actors that have Jewish last names. Does that mean that they are for the Jew? That's my first question. Like Soros. Soros and his son are pretty evil, devious people. I mean, Soros is barred from certain countries. If he went in there, they would arrest him and put him on trial. Came in and he would crash economies. I mean, he's a ruthless man. He's of Jewish descent. Another very powerful Jew that I can think of is Harari from World Economic Forum, and he was the guy that was talked about making an AI Bible and about making these cities and all this other stuff. So you can kind of see where people are getting this hate for Jews just on that playing field alone.
Yeah, and it definitely feels like it's become kind of a thing, you know? Like, within my generation, it's kind of become a joke, you know? So I remember going to school, and just the whole Hitler thing as a whole was a joke. It was a joke to be like, oh no, I'm secretly a Nazi, or oh no, I secretly hate Jews. And now it's starting to become less of a joke and more of a, I've joked about it long enough, it's starting to become true type thing.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting that you brought up the other day the story of the guy who wrote the swastika on the back of a Tesla.
Yeah.
And he was a Jew. And then the person that owned the Tesla was also a Jew.
Yep.
And so he was accusing a Jew of being anti-Semitic.
Right.
And so I feel like we're using that word so much, it's starting to lose kind of its meaning too.
It's kind of like the word racism. You're racist. It doesn't mean anything anymore because you've attached it to everything.
Yep.
And you know, there was I can't remember who I was talking to the other day, but they were talking about the Holocaust too. And they said, well, you know, do you think that really all that happened? And I said, well, yeah. Well, why would they take all these shoes and not just bury people in, you know, and they had all these different things, you know, they have all these rings. Why would they, you know, and take all this stuff? And, you know, the thing that I find interesting is that when the Holocaust was over, they went in there with cameras because they said one day people are going to deny this happened. And they went through the camps to show people what it really was. And there was people that lived around these camps. And they brought them in, and you can watch them on video. Bring them into this camp, and when they leave the camp, they're crying. Because they claim they had no idea it was this bad. They thought they were just putting them in camps, not being treated the way they were. But here we are getting to the where Hitler really didn't do what everybody says he did, and they're looking at all these black and white pictures and saying, well, see, this would have never happened, or this would. This proves that it didn't happen. You know?
Yep. I think about, there are several major points in history that people like to contend, you know. Was the Roman Empire really that big? Did they really do that much?
Yeah.
Or did Israel really own that land? You could just make up those artifacts. There's several things, or even like the moon landing is a really recent thing.
Yeah.
People looking at the footage and going, well, I don't know. I think landing on the moon sounds a bit absurd. I don't think we could have done that. Why?
And the interesting thing is they keep showing this video on TikTok and YouTube and stuff like this, and it's not even a video that was ever broadcast for the moon landing or being outside. It was a training video or something, and they're claiming to everybody, well, this is the pictures they sent back from them in space, you know, and it's like, that's not a picture of them in space. They don't have that.
Yep. My favorite thing is the videos that they zoom in on the rocks and they're like, doesn't that rock look like it has a handprint on it? Doesn't the moon look like it has a face on it? Like, you can make anything look like what you want it to look like. And if you don't want to believe that a whole people group almost faced genocide, then you won't believe it. And I think it's feeding into that. There's something about the Jewish people that makes us want to hate them.
Yeah, and you know, it's interesting that people have this hate and this disdain for them, even though I think it is 40 to 50% of the medical discoveries, the peace prizes they got from that are Jews that made all those things. And it's interesting to me also that whenever there's a disaster, the Jews are in line first to help. I think of, I can't remember how many years ago, they had that big earthquake in the Dominican Republic and decimated everything. And America was there, and who else was there? Jews. They were there. Israel was there with a tent, handing out supplies, doing medical procedures, and helping out. But yet they get this rap that they are so evil.
Well, I mean, nowadays culture is like the big thing. But then you look at Jewish culture, and it's all about being a friend.
Yeah.
You know, putting a coat on the brother's back, doing what you can to help other people. And a camp director that I know always likes to talk about how in the Old Testament it was okay to go and take like a handful of grain or to go take food from an orchard if you were passing by. It was okay as long as you didn't do it in excess. That was like hospitality. Their whole thing is about hospitality. And it's still something that a lot of them follow today, you know?
Yeah.
Just that culture. That's the way it's set up. And I remember going to Israel and going to like restaurants and everything. And here in America, you get there and the table's bare. Like there's nothing on the table. You get to a table in Israel and there's hummus, there's like a whole bunch of salads, there's water. They just like do it.
Yeah.
It's not a thought, you know?
Yeah, and I think another thing that helps promote hatred against them is not only are they giving in that way, but they are a closed society in the fact that they are supposed to marry inside their own culture, or the Jew to Jew. Now, that doesn't mean you couldn't join with them and become a part of it. Even Jesus has non-Jewish ancestors in his lineage. But they were to try to keep together as a people group. And this was God's chosen people. And God set those rules on them. And people like to take those rules and say that, oh, these are so wicked. You know, you got to stone your child if they rebel. Oh, you need to cut the corners of your beard and your hair. And all these silly laws that we call them that they had to follow. Well, it was for one purpose. It was because they were God's chosen people. And they made an agreement with God. And God said, you know, I want you to be my people, not because you're the best, not because you're the strongest, not because of anything, but because of my grace. I want to lift you up as a nation to show people what a nation could be with God.
Yeah.
And all those rules were to separate them from the rest of the nations, to keep them from appearing to be pagan or to be just barbarian. It was a way to show them that God was with this group of people. And it's interesting as you read through the Bible how many different cities and countries God dealt with. You look at Nineveh. Nineveh was an extremely terrible place. They were very cruel and brutal. And God sent Jonah to go talk to them. And of course, the story goes, Jonah doesn't want to go and gets swallowed by the big fish, the whale or whatever, and he spews him out. And he eventually goes to this country, Nineveh, and he tells them to repent. And what do? They repent. And so God was dealing with other nations at this time. It just wasn't just Israel, but Israel was his shining light. Yeah. They were supposed to draw all to them. And God's plan is that this Messiah would come through Israel. And so I think that they get a big rap because they never wanted to blend in. And so when they were dispersed in 70 A.D., they went to all different places, but they still stayed in their own people groups.
Well, I mean, I think it's funny that we view them that way. But, like, a lot of those laws you're talking about that people are like, oh, that's so evil. So, like, one that I think about a lot is sending people who are sick out of the city. And women who are menstruating were sent out of the city, right? Yeah. And it's interesting that people complain about that. But you know me, during that time of the month, and how volatile I am and how unfun I am to be around. And it's messy, you know?
Well,
and like,
yeah.
There's also the woman and child. When a woman gives birth to a child, they need to be separated for 40 days or about that. Well, come to find out, medically, that's how long it takes a woman's immune system to build back up from giving birth, and for a child's immune system to build up to be able to be around people. Yeah. And so it's a lot of the stuff that they were commanded in their laws was cleanliness, for hygiene,
Yep.
or to prevent disease, like that obsession with hand washing.
Yep.
Well, what do we do now? Wash your hands every time you leave and enter a room, do all this stuff. Well, the Jews have been doing this for like 6,000 years. They've always been doing this.
Absolutely. And even the circumcision at the 8th day, that is the prime day to circumcise a child. Is systems ready for it, and there's not as much blood, and everything's good. And if you look at like the Muslims that try to copy this, they do it way later in the period. But the 8th day is to the Jews. And it's interesting. One of the things I look at when I think about all these hatred that's going on for the Jews is I always go back to the Bible, because that's where I get all my truthful answers. This tells you everything. In Matthew 24, it's talking about what's going to happen in the last days. Now, the last days will be the last 7 years on this earth, where the beast, the Antichrist, the false prophet, and all of them will come to power, and God's going to start disciplining the earth. He's going to start judging the earth in this time. And here it says, right here, it says, then they will deliver you to be afflicted and will kill you, and you will be hated of all nations for my name's sake. And I think there is a hatred for the Jews because they are God's chosen people. And I think of all sorts of different groups and religious groups that absolutely despise the Jews. And some of them have this misidea that they would say something like this: well, the Jews are evil because they killed Jesus. Well, yeah, they put him to court, but did they kill Jesus? Who killed Jesus?
It was us and our sin. I'd even wager that if like the Catholic Church was around back then, which it wasn't, if the Catholic Church was around at the time of Jesus, let's say we replace all the Pharisees with priests, they still would have killed him.
Yeah.
I mean, they would get mad at him for claiming to be God. It's like claiming that Mary isn't sinless for them. They get in a rage over that. You can't say that. Well, they would have gotten mad at Jesus for saying, I'm God. I am that I am, They would not have stood for it. And I think even Baptists or non-denominate, any of us would have, know. Catholics is just like the low-hanging fruit here. But
the other thing I look at is, well, you could say the Jews delivered him, but if they would have killed him, they would have stoned him. That was their way of punishment. And the Bible says that Jesus had to be crucified. The Messiah has to be crucified. And so now we look at Rome. Who physically nailed Jesus to the cross?
It was Roman soldiers.
It was Roman soldiers. So why don't we have a hate for Rome? Well, why isn't there a hate for that, And then you say, well, it was actually Herod. Well, Herod's the one, or Pilate. Now it's Pilate, Pilate said, I find no fault in this man, but you go ahead and kill him if you want to kill him.
Yeah, I like that song, Who Killed Jesus? And it goes through every single one. They're like, was it Pilate? Was it the Hebrew children? Was it the soldiers? Was it Judas because he betrayed him? Who killed Jesus? And it ends with, oh, it was me, because it was my sin that put him on the cross. And I think people there's always talk of a necessary evil. Necessary evil this, necessary evil that. If there ever was a necessary evil, it'd be our Savior dying. But I don't even know if you could call that evil, because that was the plan. It was preordained for our salvation, And I mean, it had to happen.
Yes,
Somebody had to betray him. Somebody had to nail him on the cross. It had to happen.
It had to happen, even if it was just one person that had sinned. If it was just Adam and he was here by himself, somebody had to pay for that sin. And the Messiah would still have to have died in order to save man. But you're right. I mean, we all our sin is what put him on the cross. And one of the things I find interesting is when he's on the cross, all of the Jewish leaders and stuff are mocking him and saying, well, if you really are the Son of God, just come off the cross and we'll believe on you. And I always think back, do you really think the nails held him back from coming off the cross? No. what kept him on the cross was his love for us. Our sin is what he stayed on the cross for.
Well, I'd ask you another question. Do you really think we're the ones that killed him?
I don't know that we are actually the ones that killed him. Who you could say, did God kill him? And then you can say this. Jesus, when he passed away, he said, "It is finished." In other words, he had paid the total penalty for sin, and he gave up the ghost. So Jesus took his own life. So it's a very hard thing to understand. It was everything but not.
Yeah. Because also some of the stuff it describes, you go, there's no way a human could survive that.
Oh, yeah.
Like, I'm not going to say he wasn't human, but unless he had God's will behind him, unless his own will was behind him.
Because just scourging enough is enough to kill a man.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that when he was carrying the cross and they pulled a guy out of the audience to carry the cross because they didn't think he was going to make it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So he was brutally beaten, brutally. It says they ripped out his beard with their hands and hit him on the head with a scepter and did some horrific things to him.
Yep. So it's just interesting that we pin all of that. Saying, let's say Jesus died not because we did anything. Humans couldn't have killed him, right?
Yeah.
Then he couldn't have been kept on that cross by humans.
No.
And then he came here to die, not as a necessary evil, but because he needed to die to save everybody. Can we really still say Jews are the ones that killed him?
Yeah.
Can we still dislike them for that reason?
Yeah, that's a very, very good point. And I think that one of the things I've always thought about, and I think this is a little bit into that, is I think Judas, if he would have came back and repented to Jesus, would have been in heaven today. Instead, he had remorse and just hung himself. He didn't come back to God. He didn't turn to God. And so regardless of who put him on the cross and who killed him, all could be forgiven.
Yep. And I mean, everybody says, do you really think Hitler could have gotten saved and gone to heaven?
Absolutely.
And there's a serial killer that claims he was saved. Was it Jeffrey Dahmer? That says he's saved now and that he's repented from what he did? And that a lot of people are like, are you serious? You're going to tell me that this guy can go to heaven?
Absolutely. And God can do that for you too. All you have to do is put your faith and trust in Jesus Christ. Thank you for joining us today, and we will see you next week.